The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Tank Rodriguez adjusted his radio headset. His SEAL team had been moving through the rocky terrain for 3 hours. Their mission simple on paper, but deadly in reality. Intelligence had located a high-value Taliban commander in a compound nestled between 2 steep ridges. The team's job was to capture or eliminate the target before he could slip away into Pakistan. Rodriguez looked back at his 5-man team. Petty Officer James "Ghost" Williams moved like his nickname suggested, barely making a sound despite carrying a heavy machine gun. Behind him, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Sarah "Doc" Chen checked her medical kit one more time. She was the only woman on the team, but her skills had saved more lives than anyone could count. Petty Officer Second Class Tommy "Rabbit" Jackson carried the team's communications equipment, his young face serious under his helmet. Finally, there was Petty Officer First Class David Stone Morrison, their demolitions expert, whose calm demeanor had earned him his nickname. The intelligence briefing had been clear. The compound housed approximately 12 to 15 enemy fighters, armed with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. Satellite images showed a 2-story building surrounded by high walls, with several smaller structures scattered around the property. What the intelligence hadn't mentioned was the network of caves and tunnels that honeycombed the surrounding mountains. As they approached the target area, Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had led dozens of missions like this one, but something felt different today. The radio chatter from headquarters had been more urgent than usual, and the mission timeline had been compressed from the original plan. Instead of having a full day to scout and plan their approach, they had been given just 4 hours to reach the compound and execute the operation. The team reached their observation point on a ridge overlooking the compound just as the sun reached its peak. Rodriguez pulled out his binoculars and studied the target. The intelligence had been accurate about the layout, but what he saw through his lenses made his stomach tighten. Instead of 12 to 15 fighters, he counted at least 30 armed men moving around the compound. Some were positioned on the rooftops, others patrolled the perimeter, and several more were setting up what looked like heavy machine gun positions. "Ghost, you seeing this?" Rodriguez whispered into his radio. Williams was positioned 50 meters to his right with a better angle on the compound's eastern approach. "Affirmative, Chief. Count at least 30 hostiles. Maybe more. Looks like they've been reinforced since the intel was gathered." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. The mission had just become significantly more complicated. His team was outnumbered 6 to 1, and the enemy had the advantage of prepared positions and cover. But they had come too far to turn back now, and the intelligence indicated that the target would be moving to a new location within hours. He keyed his radio to contact their headquarters. "Overwatch. This is Trident 6. Situation at target location has changed. Enemy strength significantly higher than anticipated. Request permission to abort and replan." The response came back immediately. Trident 6. Negative on the abort. High-value target confirmed present and preparing to move. Mission is a go. You have fire support standing by if needed. Rodriguez felt his jaw clench. Fire support meant artillery or airstrikes, which would likely kill the target they were supposed to capture alive. But sometimes the mission changed, and adaptability was what separated Navy SEALs from regular soldiers. He gathered his team behind a large boulder that provided concealment from the compound below. "Listen up. Enemy strength is higher than expected. We're looking at 30+ hostiles in prepared positions. The good news is our target is confirmed present. The bad news is we're going to have to fight our way in and out." Doc Chen checked her rifle and nodded. "What's the plan, Chief?" Rodriguez studied the compound layout in his mind. There were 3 possible approaches. A frontal assault down the main access road, which would be suicide. A flanking maneuver from the east, which would require crossing open ground, or a stealth approach from the north, using a dry creek bed for cover. We go north, use the creek bed to get within 100 meters, then split into 2 teams. Ghost and Stone take the high ground and provide covering fire. Doc, Rabbit, and I move on the compound. We find our target, complete the mission, and extract to the landing zone. Williams studied the terrain through his scope. "Chief, Those machine gun positions have overlapping fields of fire. Once we start shooting, they'll have us pinned down in that creek bed with no way out. Rodriguez knew Williams was right, but they had to try something. The alternative was calling in an airstrike and destroying the compound, along with any intelligence it might contain. We'll move fast and use smoke grenades to mask our approach. Once we're inside the compound, the machine guns won't be able to target us without hitting their own people. The team began their descent toward the creek bed, moving carefully to avoid dislodging loose rocks that might alert the enemy sentries. The sun was beginning its afternoon descent, and Rodriguez knew they would need to complete the mission before darkness fell. Night operations were their specialty, but the enemy knew these mountains better than any outsider ever could. Halfway down the slope, Rabbit suddenly held up his fist, the universal signal to stop. Rodriguez froze and listened. In the distance, he could hear voices speaking in Pashto, the local language. The voices were getting closer. Through hand signals, Rodriguez directed his team to take cover behind the scattered boulders. Williams positioned his machine gun, with a clear field of fire down the slope. Doc Chen checked her rifle's safety and chambered a round. Stone quietly prepared a fragmentation grenade, holding it ready but not yet armed. The voices belonged to a four-man patrol that had been sent to check the ridgelines around the compound. They were moving slowly, scanning the terrain for any signs of intrusion. Rodriguez could see them through a gap between two rocks, their weapons held at the ready. They were experienced fighters, not the hastily trained militia members that American forces often encountered. One of the patrol members stopped and pointed toward the area where the SEAL team was hidden. He had noticed something, perhaps a reflection from someone's equipment or a footprint in the soft earth. The four men began moving directly toward the team's position, their weapons raised. Rodriguez faced an impossible decision. If they engaged the patrol, the gunfire would alert the entire compound to their presence, eliminating any chance of surprise. But if they remained hidden and were discovered, the patrol would radio their position to the compound, and the team would be caught in the open with no cover. He made his choice. Using hand signals, he ordered Williams to target the patrol leader, while the rest of the team took the other three. It would have to be simultaneous and silent. Rodriguez drew his combat knife and prepared to move. But before anyone could act, the patrol leader's radio crackled with an urgent message from the compound. Rodriguez couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Something had happened that required the patrol to return immediately. The four men looked at each other, then began jogging back toward the compound. Rodriguez watched them disappear around a bend in the trail and allowed himself to breathe again. Whatever had called the patrol back might have just saved his team's lives, but it also meant that something was happening at the compound that could complicate their mission even further. As they resumed their movement toward the creek bed, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The increased security, the patrol in exactly the right place at the right time, and the urgent recall all pointed to something bigger than a simple capture mission. When they reached the creek bed, Rodriguez called a halt and gathered his team. Something's not right about this whole situation. The enemy's too well prepared, and that patrol was positioned exactly where they needed to be to catch us. Stone nodded grimly. Could be they know we're coming, Chief. Maybe the intel was compromised. Rodriguez considered the possibility. If their mission had been leaked, the entire compound could be waiting for them, but they were committed now. Too far from the extraction point to abort without completing their objective. He was about to give the order to move forward when Rabbit's radio crackled with an emergency transmission. Trident 6. This is Overwatch. Be advised, enemy reinforcements moving toward your position from the south. Estimated 12 vehicles, approximately 60 additional personnel. Time to your position, 30 minutes. Rodriguez felt his blood turn cold. 60 additional enemies meant they would be facing nearly 100 hostile fighters with prepared positions and intimate knowledge of the terrain. His 5-person team would be completely overwhelmed. He looked at his teammates, seeing the same realization in their eyes. They had walked into a carefully prepared ambush, and their only choice now was to fight their way out or die trying. Rodriguez's mind raced as he processed the implications of the intelligence update. 60 additional fighters meant the enemy had planned this ambush carefully. His team was trapped between the compound ahead and the approaching reinforcements behind them. "Chief, we need to move now or we're going to be caught in a crossfire," Williams said, his voice tight with concern. The big machine gunner had been in enough firefights to know when the odds were stacked impossibly high. Rodriguez nodded and keyed his radio. "Overwatch? This is Trident 6. Request immediate extraction. Situation has deteriorated beyond mission parameters." The response came back filled with static and bad news. Trident 6. Negative on immediate extraction. Extraction birds are engaged with enemy fighters at primary landing zone. Secondary LZ is compromised. You're on your own for the next 2 hours minimum. Doc Chen looked up from where she was checking her ammunition supply. 2 hours? Chief, we don't have 2 minutes once those reinforcements arrive. Rodriguez studied the terrain around them. The creek bed provided some concealment, but it also trapped them in a narrow channel with steep sides. If the enemy positioned fighters on the ridges above, his team would be sitting ducks. The compound was still their best option for cover, even though it was filled with hostile fighters. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, gathering his team in a tight circle. "We move on the compound fast and hard. Stone, you breach the main gate with explosives. Ghost, you and Doc provide covering fire from the creek bed until we're inside. Rabbit and I go through the breach and secure a building we can defend from." Stone pulled out his explosive charges, checking the timers and detonators. "Chief, once I blow that gate, every fighter in the compound will know exactly where we are. We'll have maybe 30 seconds before they converge on our position." 30 seconds is all we need," Rodriguez replied, though he wasn't as confident as he sounded. "Once we're inside, we use the buildings for cover and try to locate our target. If we can grab him, we might be able to use him as leverage to get out of this alive." Williams was studying the compound through his scope when he suddenly stiffened. "Chief, movement on the south ridge. Looks like the advance elements of those reinforcements are already here." Rodriguez grabbed his binoculars and looked where Williams was pointing. Through the lenses, he could see armed figures moving along the ridge that overlooked their position. They were being systematically surrounded, just as he had feared. The radio crackled again with another urgent transmission. "Trident 6. This is Overwatch. Enemy communications indicate they know your exact position. Recommend immediate displacement to alternate route." Rodriguez almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. There was no alternate route. They were trapped in a narrow valley, with enemies above them on both sides, and more approaching from behind. The compound ahead was their only option, and it was filled with fighters waiting to kill them. "Rabbit, try to raise any friendlies in the area. Air support, artillery, anything that can help us out of this mess," Rodriguez ordered. The young communications specialist worked frantically with his radio equipment, cycling through frequencies and calling signs. After several minutes, he shook his head. "Nothing, Chief. All air assets are engaged elsewhere, and the nearest artillery is over 100 kilometers away." Stone finished preparing his explosive charges and looked up at Rodriguez. "Chief, I've got enough C4 to bring down half that compound. But once I start blowing things up, we're committed, no going back." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Do it. We go in fast, find cover, and hope we can hold out long enough for extraction." As Stone moved toward the compound's main gate, staying low in the creek bed to avoid detection, Rodriguez felt the weight of command pressing down on him like never before. He had led his team into an impossible situation, and now their lives depended on his decisions. Williams was tracking the movement on the ridges through his scope when he suddenly tensed. "Chief, we've got a problem. Those guys on the ridge aren't just watching us. They're setting up mortars." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Mortar fire would turn their position in the creek bed into a killing zone. The indirect fire weapons could drop shells directly onto them with pinpoint accuracy. And there was nowhere to run for cover. "How long before they're ready to fire?" he asked. "Maybe 5 minutes, based on how fast they're moving," Williams replied. "Once they start dropping rounds, we're finished." Rodriguez made the hardest decision of his military career. "Stone, blow the gate now." Everyone move toward the compound. We're going in whether we're ready or not. The explosion that followed shattered the morning quiet like thunder. Stone's charges blew the compound's main gate apart, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying in all directions. The concussion wave rolled across the valley, echoing off the mountainsides. Immediately, the compound erupted in activity. Fighters poured out of buildings, taking up defensive positions behind walls and vehicles. Muzzle flashes began winking from windows and rooftops as automatic weapons opened fire on the SEAL team's position. Rodriguez and Rabbit sprinted toward the smoking breach in the wall, bullets whining past their heads and kicking up dust around their feet. Behind them, Williams's machine gun roared as he provided covering fire, his heavy rounds smashing into the compound's defensive positions. They made it through the breach just as the first mortar round landed in the creek bed where they had been positioned moments before. The explosion sent dirt and rocks flying high into the air, and Rodriguez knew they had escaped death by seconds. Inside the compound, chaos reigned. Rodriguez and Rabbit took cover behind an overturned truck, while enemy fighters tried to maneuver around them. The SEAL chief could hear shouted commands in Pashto and Arabic as the defenders tried to organize their response to the unexpected intrusion. "Doc, Stone, get through that breach now," Rodriguez yelled into his radio while returning fire at a group of fighters advancing from the main building. Chen and Stone came through the destroyed gate at a dead run, diving for cover as bullets sparked off the concrete around them. Stone immediately began setting up additional explosive charges, preparing to deny the enemy key positions within the compound. Williams was still in the creek bed, his machine gun hammering away at the fighters on the rooftops. But Rodriguez could see that his position was becoming untenable. The mortars on the ridge had found their range, and explosions were walking closer to his position with each round. "Ghost, fall back to the compound," Rodriguez ordered. "Your position is about to be overrun." Williams grabbed his machine gun and started moving, but the enemy fighters had anticipated his route. As he approached the breach in the wall, crossfire from two different positions caught him in the open. Rodriguez watched in horror as his teammates stumbled and fell, blood spreading across his uniform. "Man down." Doc Chen was already moving before Rodriguez could give the order. She sprinted across the compound's courtyard under heavy fire, diving and rolling to avoid the bullets that chased her every step. Rodriguez felt rage building in his chest as he watched Chen working frantically to stabilize Williams. His team was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that had planned this ambush perfectly. They had walked into a trap, and now they were paying the price for faulty intelligence and overconfident planning. The radio crackled with another transmission, this one from Stone. "Chief, I found our target. He's in the main building, second floor, but there's at least 15 fighters between us and him." Rodriguez looked at his remaining team members. Williams was wounded and unconscious. Chen was treating his injuries while under fire. Rabbit was running low on ammunition, and Stone was outnumbered by the fighters guarding their objective. More mortar rounds began falling inside the compound as the enemy adjusted their fire. The explosions were getting closer, and Rodriguez knew it was only a matter of time before a direct hit finished what was left of his team. He keyed his radio with shaking hands. "Overwatch, this is Trident 6. We are in critical situation. Request immediate emergency extraction. We cannot hold this position much longer." The response was filled with static and desperation. "Trident 6, all extraction assets still engaged. No support available for another 90 minutes minimum." Rodriguez slumped against the overturned truck, the weight of defeat crushing down on him. 90 minutes might as well have been 90 hours. His ammunition was running low, his team was pinned down under heavy fire, and the enemy was closing in from all sides. He looked at his teammates, seeing the same realization in their eyes. They had fought their way into the compound, but they weren't fighting their way out. The mission had failed, and they were going to die in this dusty courtyard, thousands of miles from home. "We're doomed," Rodriguez said quietly into his radio, not caring who heard the transmission. It was the simple truth, spoken by a man who had run out of options and was facing the end of everything he had worked for his entire career. But sometimes, when everything seems lost and hope has disappeared completely, help arrives from the most unexpected places. 3 kilometers away, on a rocky outcrop that overlooked the valley, Staff Sergeant Elena Viper Kozlov, adjusted the scope on her Barrett M107 50 caliber sniper rifle. The Russian-born American soldier had been in position since before dawn, part of a long-range reconnaissance mission that had nothing to do with the SEAL team's operation. But when she heard Rodriguez's desperate transmission over the emergency frequency, everything changed. Kozlov had been tracking terrorist movements in the region for 3 weeks, gathering intelligence on supply routes and safe houses. Her position on the mountain gave her a commanding view of the entire valley, including the compound where the SEAL team was now trapped. Through her high-powered scope, she could see the desperate firefight unfolding below. "Control, this is Viper 7, she spoke quietly into her radio. "I have eyes on Trident 6's position. They are in immediate danger of being overrun. Requesting permission to provide long-range fire support." The response came back quickly. "Viper 7, you are authorized to provide immediate assistance. Use your own judgment on target selection." Kozlov smiled grimly and settled into her shooting position. At 3 kilometers distance, most snipers would consider the shots impossible. The bullet would have to travel through varying air densities, crosswinds, and temperature gradients. The curvature of the Earth itself would affect the trajectory. But Kozlov wasn't most snipers. She had grown up in Siberia, where her grandfather had taught her to hunt wolves at extreme range with an old Mosin Nagant rifle. Later, as a member of the U.S. Army's elite sniper program, she had set records for long-distance precision shooting. The 50 caliber Barrett in her hands was capable of hitting targets accurately at over 2 kilometers. And she had pushed it even further in combat. Through her scope, she could see the mortar crew on the ridge that was systematically destroying the SEAL team's position. 3 men were loading rounds, while a 4th adjusted the weapon's aim. They were her first priority. Kozlov made the complex calculations in her head, accounting for wind speed, air pressure, temperature, and the considerable bullet drop over such an extreme distance. She adjusted her scope's elevation and windage knobs, then settled the crosshairs on the mortar crew's leader. Her first shot thundered across the valley. The massive 50 caliber round screaming through the air at over 800 meters per second. 3 seconds later, the mortar team leader simply vanished, his body torn apart by the devastating impact. The other crew members looked around in confusion, unable to determine where the shot had come from. Kozlov worked the bolt action smoothly and acquired her next target. The second mortar crewman was reaching for his rifle when her bullet found him, spinning him around and dropping him behind the weapon. The remaining 2 crew members abandoned their position and ran for cover, but there was nowhere to hide from Kozlov's elevated position. Her 3rd and 4th shots eliminated the mortar crew completely, removing the immediate threat to the trapped SEAL team. But she was just getting started. In the compound below, Rodriguez heard the distant sound of rifle fire and saw one of the rooftop fighters suddenly collapse. At first, he thought it might be friendly artillery, but the precision of the shots quickly told him otherwise. Someone with incredible skill was providing sniper support from an impossible distance. "Did anyone call for sniper support?" he asked over the radio, but the responses were negative. Whoever was helping them was acting on their own initiative. Kozlov shifted her attention to the fighters positioned on the compound's rooftops. These targets presented a greater challenge because they were partially concealed behind cover, requiring her to wait for clear shots. But her patience was legendary, and she had all day to work. Her 5th shot took out a machine gunner who had been raking the courtyard with automatic fire. The 6th eliminated his assistant gunner before he could take over the weapon. The 7th shot destroyed a rocket-propelled grenade launcher that was being aimed at the SEAL team's position. The enemy fighters were beginning to panic. They could hear the massive rifle reports echoing across the valley, but they couldn't locate the source of the devastating accurate fire that was systematically destroying their positions. Some began shooting wildly at the surrounding ridges, hoping to suppress the unknown sniper. Rodriguez watched in amazement as the tide of battle began to shift. The overwhelming enemy fire that had pinned his team down was decreasing with each perfectly placed shot from their unknown benefactor. Fighters who had been advancing confidently on their positions were now seeking cover, afraid to expose themselves. "Doc, how's Ghost?" Rodriguez called to Chen, who was still working on Williams behind a concrete barrier. "Stable for now. But I need to get him to a real medical facility soon, Chen replied. Whoever's shooting up there just bought us some time, but it won't last forever. Kozlov continued her methodical elimination of targets, working from the most dangerous threats to the least. Her 8th through 15th shots cleared the eastern rooftop completely, forcing the defenders to abandon their elevated positions. Shots 16 through 22 eliminated a group of fighters who had been attempting to flank the SEAL team from the south. The sniper's ammunition supply was not unlimited. Each 50 caliber round was precious, and she had to make every shot count. But years of training and combat experience had taught her to remain calm under pressure and select targets that would have the maximum impact on the battle. Stone had managed to work his way closer to the main building where their target was located. With the enemy fire significantly reduced, he could move more freely around the compound. "Chief, I've got a clear path to the objective. Cover me while I make the grab." Rodriguez nodded and signaled to Rabbit, who was providing security from behind an abandoned vehicle. Together, they laid down covering fire as Stone approached the building's entrance. Kozlov saw the SEAL moving toward the main building and immediately shifted her attention to the windows and doorways where enemy fighters might be waiting to ambush him. Her 23rd shot shattered the skull of a fighter who was aiming an assault rifle at Stone's back from a second-floor window. The 24th and 25th shots eliminated 2 more defenders who were preparing to throw grenades down on Stone's position. The precision of the long-range fire was so devastating that the remaining fighters in the building were afraid to show themselves at windows or doorways. Stone disappeared inside the building, and Rodriguez could hear gunfire and explosions from within as the demolitions expert fought his way to their target. Minutes passed with no communication, and Rodriguez began to worry that Stone had been killed or wounded. Then his radio crackled with Stone's voice, slightly out of breath but alive. "Chief, I've got our package. Target is wounded but alive. There's a back exit, but it's covered by 3 fighters in a secondary building." Kozlov heard the transmission and immediately began scanning the area behind the main building through her scope. She located the 3 fighters that Stone had mentioned, positioned in windows of a smaller structure that commanded the rear exit. Her 26th, 27th, and 28th shots eliminated all 3 fighters within seconds of each other, the massive bullets punching through walls and windows to reach their targets. The back exit was now clear for Stone's extraction. Rodriguez felt hope beginning to return as he watched the systematic destruction of the enemy's defensive positions. The unknown sniper was not just providing random fire support. They were clearly observing the battle and targeting exactly the threats that posed the greatest danger to his team. Stone emerged from the rear of the building carrying their target, a bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing who appeared to be wounded but conscious. The high-value target that they had been sent to capture was finally in their hands. But the mission wasn't complete until they reached the extraction point, and Rodriguez could see that enemy reinforcements were still arriving in the valley. Vehicles were approaching from multiple directions, carrying fresh fighters who would soon surround the compound completely. Kozlov had also observed the approaching reinforcements and knew that her work was far from finished. The SEAL team would need continuous cover fire to fight their way out of the compound and reach their extraction point. She began targeting the approaching vehicles, aiming for drivers and crew-served weapons. Her 29th shot disabled a truck carrying a heavy machine gun, the 50 caliber round penetrating the engine block and bringing the vehicle to a smoking stop. The 30th shot eliminated the machine gun crew before they could dismount and set up their weapon. Shots 31 through 35 systematically destroyed the combat effectiveness of an entire convoy of reinforcements, targeting key personnel and heavy weapon systems. The enemy fighters were beginning to understand that they were facing someone with extraordinary skill and equipment, but they couldn't withdraw from the battle without losing face among their fellow fighters. Rodriguez made the decision to begin moving his team toward the extraction point, while their sniper support was still effective. "Everyone listen up. We're moving toward the secondary LZ. Ghost is stable enough to move with assistance. Doc, you and Rabbit carry him. Stone, you handle our package. I'll provide rearguard security." The team began their fighting withdrawal from the compound, moving from cover to cover while Kozlov provided overwatch from her distant position. Every time an enemy fighter tried to pursue the escaping SEALs, her rifle spoke with devastating authority. Her 36th shot eliminated a sniper who had been tracking Rodriguez through his own scope. The 37th took out a fighter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher who was preparing to fire at the fleeing team. The 38th shot destroyed a radio operator who was coordinating the enemy's pursuit. As the SEAL team reached the edge of the compound and began moving toward their extraction point, Kozlov prepared for her final shot of the engagement. Through her scope, she could see an enemy commander rallying his fighters for a final assault on the escaping Americans. The man was pointing and gesturing, clearly organizing a pursuit that could overtake the wounded SEAL team before they reached safety. Her 39th and final shot was the longest and most difficult of the entire engagement. The target was partially concealed behind cover, moving erratically, and the wind had shifted since her last shots, but Kozlov had saved her best for last. The massive .50 caliber bullet found its target with surgical precision, eliminating the enemy commander and ending any organized pursuit of the SEAL team. The remaining fighters, demoralized by the loss of their leader and the devastating long-range fire they had endured, allowed the Americans to escape without further interference. 2 hours later, Rodriguez and his team were aboard a medical evacuation helicopter, flying towards safety with their captured target and wounded teammate. Williams was stable and would make a full recovery thanks to Doc Chen's skilled treatment under fire. Rodriguez never learned the identity of the sniper who had saved their lives that day. The official reports listed the engagement as a successful mission with minimal casualties, but he knew the truth. Without those 39 perfect shots from 3 kilometers away, his entire team would have died in that dusty compound. Years later, when he told the story to new SEAL trainees, Rodriguez would always emphasize the lesson he had learned that day. In combat, you never know where help might come from, and sometimes a single skilled individual can change the entire outcome of a battle. The sniper who had saved them proved that precision, patience, and exceptional skill could overcome even the most impossible odds. Elena Kozlov never spoke publicly about the engagement, maintaining the professional silence that was expected of special operations personnel. But in her personal journal that night, she made a simple entry. 39 rounds expended. Mission successful. Americans extracted safely. It was the kind of understated professionalism that had made her one of the most effective snipers in military history, and the reason why 5 Navy SEALs lived to fight another day.